Hello and welcome to the Functionally Enlightened Podcast with Dr. Sharon Sarita. We interview well-respected medical and functional practitioners, as well as patients who have overcome disabling chronic conditions, such as dysautonomia, and reclaimed their health. These enlightened guests provide helpful tips on managing chronic pain and illnesses, using a combination of traditional and whole-body healing modalities. If you're interested in natural healing and quality of life improvement, you're in the right place. Thank you for listening to today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Functionally Enlightened Podcast. Today, we have another very special guest who is a published author. I'm so excited to have her share her journey. Sydney Anne Bennett is a writer, a speaker, and a disability advocate who uses her platform to bring hope, honesty, and faith into the conversation around chronic illness. This is fundamental to healing, so I appreciate all the insights she's going to share with us. But to give you a little bit of a synopsis about her journey, shortly after her honeymoon, Sydney became disabled and was later diagnosed with functional neurological disorder, which is a condition that disrupts the communication between the brain and the body. And this leads to daily seizures and chronic pain, as well as numerous mobility challenges. Through her growing an online community of over 300,000 followers, Sydney shares her journey with vulnerability, humor, and a deep reliance on her faith in Jesus. She encourages others to find meaning, identity, and hope, even when life looks radically different than expected. She lives in Idaho currently with her husband and her two daughters, and she is, as I mentioned earlier, the author of Fearfully and Wonderfully Broken, which released in April, I believe it was April 28th, and this is a powerful reflection on suffering, faith, and resilience in the face of chronic illness. Sydney, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sharon. I'm excited.
Of course. Can you take us back to that pivotal moment about 2 weeks or so after your honeymoon? What did that transition look like and feel like for you physically?
Yeah, so for about a year before that, I've been experiencing unexplained chronic pain, no diagnosis from a doctor. They couldn't figure out what was going on, but it was getting slowly worse. So we got married kind of realizing that there was something that was going on that we didn't understand, but we obviously had no idea what was going to happen. And 2 weeks after our honeymoon, we were driving back from a date night. It was just a regular evening, and my hands became paralyzed in the car. So we rushed to the emergency room, and it was Junction City, Kansas, so not a ton of medical testing they could do there. So they ran a couple preliminary tests, couldn't find anything, and they sent me home with my hands still paralyzed. Well, within the 2 weeks that followed, I lost the ability to walk, the ability to speak, lost sense of taste, started having seizures and hallucinations, episodes of incoherence where I would just mentally regress to the mind of a small child again. I also had intense chronic pain all over my body and had trouble moving, or periods of paralysis where I couldn't move at all. And no one could figure out what was happening. So I was told by a doctor that I might be dying, and they didn't know why. So it took about a month of those very severe symptoms before I received the diagnosis of functional neurological disorder. So that basically means that my brain can't communicate correctly with my central nervous system. So it can cause any number of neurological symptoms like the ones that I experience, and it overlaps with a lot of other neurological conditions.
And do you see a parallel between what our community, the implant-injured community, would feel? I think you mentioned some of the symptoms, but in the implant-injured community, they develop Asia syndrome, and this is like an autoinflammatory condition, and it does affect the nervous system. It affects that autonomic nervous system. Do you see parallels between the onset of what others may be experiencing even after medical interventions?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Anything that affects the nervous system, I also have overlapping symptoms with. So dysautonomia and chronic pain, or things like, just the basic muscle stiffness and tremors and the things, fatigue, all of those things that are hard to just get through the day-to-day function, but can appear invisible from the outside. So people don't necessarily understand that you're disabled or that you're ill or very exhausted or going through something like that. There's a lot of overlap with those kinds of symptoms.
And for you, it was more, I guess you didn't have an identifying trigger that you could pinpoint, right? Or was there something that you could trace this back to?
Yeah, they try to find a trigger, and I have theories about what the trigger might have
Right.
been. But a lot of the symptoms came on so gradually
Hmm.
until that moment of paralysis where it just happened super fast that it is kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what the starting place was. Um, and I think that sometimes our brains or nervous systems can be predisposed to a condition, and then something can trigger the switch, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not the cause of the illness. And so there's a lot of speculation about how that works in our minds. But yeah, it's been interesting to think about because I'm not sure if I can exactly pinpoint an exact thing.
Yeah, and a common thread, what you just mentioned, is being misunderstood and dismissed. What was your experience navigating the medical system?
Yes. So the neurologist who diagnosed me actually explained my condition as completely psychological. So he told me that, keep in mind at this point that I'm not able to walk and I'm bedbound most of the time. He told me that it was stress induced, that it was caused by anxiety, and it was all basically in my head. So I had upcoming MRI scans and additional testing to help rule out other serious diseases, and he canceled all of those and said, I'm referring you to a psychiatrist.
Mm,
So I was hearing this coming from someone who had been completely healthy a few years before, who is very, very active and is now bedbound in a completely life changed
right.
condition, and thinking that maybe this is my fault because it's somehow psychological. Like, am I causing this? Am I not fighting hard enough? What am I doing wrong? Or my body is in this condition now and I can't snap out of it. So I was sent home with no research, no medical direction, just a referral to a therapist.
Hmm.
And I ended up doing a ton of my own research on my disability. So that's kind of how I found out more about the recent testing. So a lot of the medical theories on this date back all the way to like theories of hysteria, where a lot of conditions that we know are neurologically based today, like epilepsy, um, were actually believed to be hysteria way back when. So my condition also had theories that said that it was rooted in psychiatry only, and
Hmm.
that neurologist believed in those older studies. He was an older psychologist or an older neurologist who probably went to medical school a while ago, and recent studies today within the last decade show that it is neurologically based, that we can't actually prove there's any psychological base that would say that it's only in our heads. And so it's really hard to go to a doctor who is supposed to be the medical authority and realize that he doesn't understand what your condition actually is. And especially if that doctor either has the wrong ideas or the wrong information about your illness, or he isn't humble enough to tell
Mm,
you, we don't understand what's going on, we don't know what's
exactly.
going on, but we're going to figure this out. That can be really difficult and really isolating because it puts the burden back onto the patient. And either the patient thinks this is my fault, I'm causing this somehow, or they feel completely dismissed and like they have no direction. And a lot of times, people are waiting months to see some sort of specialist that can help them with their condition. And so getting a diagnosis or like a flimsy reason kind of thrown back in their face can feel like almost an end in a way, because they don't know, where else do I go after this? I know that I'm sick, but I don't know why. And I wish that I had a reason, because it would give me an ability to kind of understand what I'm going through. It would give me a word, a language to put to this pain that I'm going through. And it would also give me a direction where now I can understand it and figure out a way to move forward.
Yeah, Sydney, I couldn't agree with you more on this. The medical gaslighting that exists and the disjointed medical care out there in the conventional realm, we'll say, and just the whole idea of the hopelessness that comes out when you're seeking help, where you're seeking support from those who supposedly know, who've been trained in all of these processes and or the misfiring of the body. So what would you say to someone who feels like their symptoms are real, but they're not being validated or they're not being understood?
Yeah, so it's so hard because obviously, like the best answer is to be able to find a doctor who will listen to you and who's willing to dig through that with you. And it's so much easier said than done because especially I only am familiar with the medical system in the United States, but again, oftentimes we're going through, months and months of waiting and referrals to try to find someone. And it can feel like you're starting the process all over again if you need to look for someone new. So there's a couple things that you can do. One of them is to push back a little bit on the doctor. And if you do it too confrontationally, a lot of doctors will end up kind of hardening up
Hmm.
and being harder to persuade in that direction. So you don't want to act as if, I am the know-it-all on my own condition and you don't know anything, because that can be off-putting to a lot of doctors and make it harder to get what you need.
Hmm.
But one way that you can do this that I've used in the past is, okay, I understand what you're saying. Thank you so much for explaining this. I'm still experiencing symptoms that are really hard for me to manage in the day to day. So it's helpful to know that you don't think there's anything serious going on, but I still need to figure out how to manage this in the day to day. Could you recommend testing that would help us figure out how to target these symptoms? Or saying, I understand that you don't think this is anything serious. I I'm really curious or I'm really concerned about these possible diseases or causes. And I know you don't think it's those things, but could you just humor me? Just to humor me, could we do some testing on that? And then that will give me peace of mind to know that we've ruled those things out. And a lot of times, if you approach it humbly or curiously,
Hmm.
that is more welcome to doctors because they still feel like, they're still the authority in the situation, but it might be able to get you a leg in where they're like, okay, yes, we can work with this patient I don't think it's these things, but obviously this patient would be helped at least mentally by figuring out these different options. So those are some things that you could do. And then also asking for a second opinion can be helpful too. Like I might not be able to, it might take me a long time if I heard that from that neurologist to go back to my primary care and say, I need a different neurologist. That whole paperwork process would take a while. But if directly to that neurologist, I said, okay, thank you so much. I would love a second opinion on this as well. Then he could send me directly to another neurologist. And that might be a faster shortcut across all of the paperwork trail to get a second opinion and someone else who might be able to look through your history or your diagnosis or your symptoms and figure out a different avenue for you.
Yes, and I love those points that you just mentioned, Sydney, about the questions that you can ask with curiosity. So that is a good way to reshift your mindset. You're not coming at it in a place of fear, but a place of curiosity. And with that, even just the parasympathetic state of asking the questions will kind of put the energy out there in the room between you and the practitioner you're speaking to. And so I do think that that is a crucial point in if you're starting your chronic illness healing journey, to maybe go back, rewind this, and take either a screenshot of the transcript so you can have those questions ready, or just write them down and have them in your medical snapshot. So the next time you visit your practitioner, you'll have those readily available and can move forward without feeling like shunned or gaslit as you leave the office. So, kind of shifting gears here into the emotional process. So, how do you emotionally process symptoms that don't always have clear explanations or have that linear recovery path in front of you?
It's so hard because I think a lot of us see a diagnosis as kind of the permission to feel our symptoms. So if we don't know what's going on and we feel like, there's no real disease that I have that I know about, it almost feels like it invalidates our suffering because we can't just tell people, oh, yes, I have X illness and that's why I experience X things. We just have this kind of vague underlying knowledge that there's something that's off and we don't know what it is, and that can really play a lot of mental games because it feels like you don't have permission to feel your symptoms or you can't share your symptoms with other people because you don't know what's causing them. And it can also be very unsettling to just have that uncertainty of not knowing if you're going to get better or what treatment options there are available for you. So what I remember when I first got sick, needing to do so much of that research on my own, where I kind of had to bring research to my doctors in a way and say, okay, this is what I understand of my illness, because a lot of them had no idea what F&D was. So they would ask me to explain it to them. But I think doing research on your own condition can help that a lot. And I'm not meaning, like, obviously, if you look up nervous symptom disorders or various symptoms that are shared with a lot of different conditions or disabilities, you could get a vast range of information that might not be helpful or could be too scary and overwhelming because there's so many things that these conditions can overlap with. But figuring out other people who have experienced similar things and realizing that your symptom is not made valid by a diagnosis. The diagnosis is simply the label that we place on a collection of symptoms to be able to understand them better. So being able to research into your own medical condition, not in a way that's fearful or looking everywhere for, what are the 10 or 20 conditions that might be causing this, but in a way that seeks to understand what's going on in your body and various things that you can do that other people have done that could help with that. That can be very helpful. And then just mentally, you need to be able to speak the truth back to yourself. So in our minds, we often play these anxiety games, these uncertainty games, and we have these narratives in our minds that, we're supposed to be inspiring with whatever illness we're going through, or we're supposed to be able to maintain our current capacity or our pre-illness capacity. And that's simply just not the case for a lot of people, but it can feel like we can't shift that gear if we don't have a diagnosis. And so realizing that your capacity has changed. The diagnosis is not the thing that makes you sick. You are already sick. Your capacity has already changed. And so it is actually okay to change your lifestyle in order to meet the current season that your body is in right now. It's okay to make those changes already, even before you have a diagnosis. And when you think those things in your mind about, I'm not trying hard enough, or maybe I'm just making this up in my head, things like that, you have to actually say the truth. And it often helps to say it out loud, to say that truth back to yourself, because as you say it often enough, even if it feels like you don't believe it yet, that starts coming back into your mind, and it starts reshaping the narrative of what your symptoms are and who you are in light of that. And then obviously I'm a Christian as well. So on a bigger level, I also speak the truth of scripture back to myself. And I know that my value isn't found in myself, in my strength, it's found in the Lord. And so knowing that my capacity can change, my independence can change drastically, and that doesn't change my value or who I am in Christ. That's the truth that I need to speak back to myself over and over again, because it's not something that you can just say once and then you move on. And it's a thing that you constantly have to surrender, that you constantly have to retrain. But the good news is it gets easier to do that the longer you do it.
Mm-hmm. So going to that frame of mind, and that's something I leaned into when I was bedbound also, when there was nothing else I could do, with the 3 a.m. waking hour that I had kind of built in because of that flight or fight response. My cortisol levels were through the roof. I remember turning on the TV and listening to these famous sermons and just kind of letting that sit in. And even though I couldn't, at that point, my brain cognition was so low, I couldn't understand everything that was being said. I could pick up on little bits of the conversation. And those are the things that kind of seated me or grounded me when there was nothing else that I could hold on to. So I know in communities where healing is often expected, how do you hold on to faith when that restoration isn't coming, or at least it's not coming quick enough?
Mm-hmm. I think it starts with getting very honest with God in your prayers. And that sounds like it's just, oh, well, of course. But I think, at least for me, and I know for a lot of other people, I almost felt like I needed to feel closer to God before I could pray to him. Or I was going through this period of just feeling, very distant, almost hardened, like I had kind of sealed myself up as a form of self-protection, even from God. And I thought, okay, I need to want to pray before I actually pray, or I need to feel more closeness with God, and then I'll feel a desire to pray to Him. And that was a mistake, because I should have prayed from that place of distance and told God about that. So getting really honest with God in your prayers is often the first step to feeling closer to Him and to being able to rely on His strength more completely. So actually having a prayer that says something like, God, I do not feel like praying to you. I feel far away from you. I feel like you're punishing me, or I feel angry at you. I feel like I'm broken. I feel like there is no possible way you can bring good out of this situation that I'm in. Actually saying those things to the Lord and being honest with the Lord in your heart about those things is one of the ways that He actually starts to bridge that distance that you might feel between the season that you're in and who He is, who His character is. And the Bible actually gives us language for this, which I didn't realize as fully before I got sick, because there's a lot of things that Christians think we're not allowed to say out loud. And if we're not allowed to say those things to other Christians, how much more so are we not allowed to say them to God? But God actually gives us really deeply raw and profound language in the Bible to speak back to Him. The Psalms, the prophets, they say things like, I forget what happiness feels like. Like that's in Lamentations. Or David, the psalmist, he says, my bed is swimming with tears. My eyes waste away out of mourning. Or asking the Lord, Lord, how long will you forget me? How long will you be far from me? Those are things that as Christians, we feel like, well, if I told another believer that I'm feeling this way, they would just never look at me the same way again. And God actually gives us that language in the Bible, and He gives that to us as a gift to show that our faith can actually meet the deepest, most profound depths of suffering. And we're allowed to not only feel those things, but to actually say those feelings to the Lord and cry out for His help and for His mercy. And so realizing that your faith is not supposed to numb you from the hard things that you're going through, but is actually supposed to open you up, and you're able to feel a profound capacity for suffering alongside the Lord's strength. And that suffering is actually what opens you up to the Lord's strength if you allow it to. That's something that's deeply encouraging to the believer, because we know that we're allowed to grieve and we're allowed to suffer, but we're not grieving or suffering as someone who doesn't have hope.
So pivoting from there, I know there's often pressure for people or from people, and they tell you, you just have to stay positive, or you're going to get better. You just got to keep doing the right things. How do you differentiate true hope from that toxic positivity?
True hope is bigger than the physical healing of your body. And I think that, especially in the Christian community, we often get this idea that we suffer because we don't have enough faith. And, that's kind of where that language seems to come from, where you just need to think positively, you just need to trust in the Lord more. And we get this idea that if we're trusting in the Lord more, or if we're thinking positively enough, that all of a sudden our suffering will end, that He'll bring us out of the season of suffering. And that if we're still really in this period of loss and grief and turmoil, that it's because of our lack of faith. But that's not what the Bible says about suffering. In fact, if we think that suffering is caused by lack of faith, we'd have to say that Jesus lacked faith, because the Bible calls Him a man of sorrows. He suffered more than any of us. So what we actually see is that it's not, an idea of positivity where we need to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps to get out of the suffering that we're in. But we actually need to realize our complete dependence on the Lord in the suffering we're in. Our suffering isn't meant to teach us independence. It's meant to teach us the right kind of dependence. And it is good and it is wonderful to pray for physical healing and to be looking for answers and to be trying to work in ways that support your body and that help you manage, your symptoms or even recover from your symptoms. But if all of your hope as the believer is in physical healing, then that's one, it's going to feel empty to you because the Lord might not be in that, or that might not be in your future. And then two, if it doesn't happen, then your hope is completely dashed. So the difference between, positive thinking and the true hope of the believer is that the positive thinking becomes the end in itself. And if you don't get to the physical place where you want to, then it feels like you're just upended again. But the hope as the believer goes beyond physical healing. It goes beyond the grave. It's something that says, even if I live the rest of my life this way, which I can't even imagine right now, but I just need to live faithfully today, and the Lord will help me through tomorrow. Even if I don't experience that physical healing in this lifetime, I know that I can still have hope in Jesus Christ, because one day He is coming again and He is going to restore all things. He's going to turn my pain right now into an eternal weight of glory. I am going to experience full redemption of my body and my soul, and I can look forward to that beyond the prospect of physical healing in this lifetime.
Yes, and I love that promise, especially with flare days and when we're feeling incapacitated, especially if we have other obligations, whether it be work or parenting or taking care of other family members. Some of us are taking care of our parents, depending on the age demographic. So I know when I was disabled, I had two young children. I had one that was 3 at the time, and the other one was 9. And I'm fortunate that they don't remember the extent of the disability and the extent of pain and suffering. But when you're raising children while navigating disability, can you help us understand how you redefined your understanding and your strength and capacity?
Hmm. Yeah, so I have two young children as well. My oldest is 2, and my second daughter is 8 months.
Oh.
And so I'm very much in the thick of motherhood and the chaos and sleep deprivation and all the
Mm,
wonderful things that go on with that. So I've only experienced motherhood from the perspective of disability,
mhm,
because I became a mom after I became disabled, and a lot of days I'm parenting from a wheelchair. And so I had no idea what this would look like, because there's not a lot of representation that you see online from parents that are either parenting through a disability or even through a chronic illness, where we talk about the normal parent things of, oh yes, those that sleep deprived season, and the wakeful nights, and you'll feel exhausted all the time. But and then you hear that from the perspective of someone who's going through daily exhaustion already without being a parent, and it feels like, oh my gosh, could I ever become a mom? And that's how I felt, where I'm already experiencing all these things, and then I'm hearing from parents that it gets worse.
mm,
And so how am I going to be able to cope with that when it comes? And one thing that I tell parents, and or people that are wanting to become parents, is that a lot of times your chronic illness is actually giving you practice for a lot of the hard things that people feel overwhelmed by in parenting. So you're already doing a lot of the hard things. You're already dealing with a sleep deprivation. You're already dealing with a body that changes and a capacity that changes. You're already dealing with needing to slow down. You're already dealing, with all of these things that kind of hit first-time parents for the very first time when they have a kid. You're already doing them before you have a kid, but without the joy and the blessing of having a child. And so that kind of helped ease it a little bit, because I realized that a lot of these parents that were being overwhelmed by these things in parenting were overwhelmed because they were doing it for the very first time. And I had been able to practice those things previously. But then also just knowing that a lot of parenting just happens on the job. So that's the same for a physically able-bodied, healthy parent, and it's the same for a parent who's walking through chronic illness or disability. And knowing that either way, you're not going to actually know what parenting will look like. And either way, your capacity is going to change, and you are going to feel at your wit's end at times and need to call out to the Lord and receive help gratefully from other people who hopefully will be able to support you and surround you in the hard seasons. And then realizing that the expectations that our culture puts, or that we put on ourselves for parenting, is often so so just off the wall and overwhelming, where, a lot of parents tell me or ask me, how do you keep up with your kids from a wheelchair? Like, that just seems crazy to me. And it seemed crazy to me a little while ago too. But now I realize as a parent that a lot of parenting isn't so much keeping up with our kids, it's slowing down for our kids.
Mm.
And parenting from the perspective of someone who has a disability and who has a body who can't move fast. And, for a lot of parents with chronic illnesses, this actually provides a unique gift in a way, because a lot of us had to learn, be the first generation to learn that it's okay to rest, and that it's okay to slow down, and that it's okay to receive help from others and to rely on the Lord. And those lessons were really hard for us because we didn't see models of that necessarily. And so we were having to grapple with that for the first time. But our kids are seeing a model of that because we're modeling it for them. And being in a body that's forcing me to do the things that I should be doing anyway, to receive rest as a blessing, to receive help from others as a blessing, to slow down in my life and actually experience it and be present with my kids, and that's a blessing. I'm being forced to do those things in my body. And that's actually a unique gift to me and my children, because I may not otherwise choose to do those things. And then that burden is back on my kids to figure it out for the first time because they didn't have it modeled for them.
Mm. That is a wonderful reframe right there. The gift that a disability may actually present in your life and in the lives of those around you. I often say that there's an empathy that will go out if you have more of that mindset shift that you do have limitations and you can, like you mentioned earlier, reorganize your lifestyle to accommodate still living life, still being present whenever possible. And I know that certain people have such profound chronic illness that they do feel they don't have enough energy or stamina to get out of bed, much less to be present. But finding those moments where if you have family around that you can spend time with them in whatever capacity and really take stock in that brief moment of time, because those are the times that will carry us through and will keep us with hope that you can continue to experience those moments of joy, however few and far between they are currently. As you mentioned, again, with practice or with continued incorporating of this activity, you can see that can expand. And again, in the height of my disability, I was so withdrawn. I completely shut down from being able to receive love, kindness, assistance, and I quit asking for help. And that was where things spiraled even further. And so opening up and identifying and just letting people know, hey, I have boundaries now, and I need you to help me keep to those boundaries so that I can live to the best of my ability at this time. I know with invisible illness, it's hard to understand. People don't see that you're feeling sick. You can be presenting as normal, like feeling zero symptoms, but internally you're feeling all kinds of chaos. And I know you have built a large platform and you've been sharing your story all along. What has surprised you most about the rise in visibility of these invisible illnesses?
Hmm, that's a great question. Yeah, so when I first got sick, I had the feeling that a lot of people have when they get sick, is that I'm the only one who feels this way. And you don't know anyone else who's going through these crazy symptoms, or who is feeling, so isolated, or who's using mobility aids as a young person. And it did feel extremely isolating. So one of the first things that visibility provided for me was just the understanding that I wasn't alone in this. And so I first went on Instagram, as a 22-year-old, looking for answers and trying to see, who else is out there who's 22 and using a cane,
Hmm.
and who is exhausted by 9 in the morning and needs to go back into bed and take a nap. So having these weird symptoms that I felt isolated in, going to social media and the fact that people are actually being vulnerable about these things, I think is opening up an understanding of ourselves where we feel less isolated, because we actually realize these things that are invisible in in the real world, in the outside world, in the people that we interact with every day, online kind of opens up that wall a little bit, and people start sharing what's going on the inside, and they start sharing the vulnerability of the things that we may not be able to see by looking. So it's, in a way, it is making those invisible illnesses visible. And the first thing that does is provide validation for us, for the people who are experiencing those things, realizing that we're not actually alone, that we're not crazy, that we're not isolated. That is a huge gift. And I think it also gives us such a good platform for education of ourselves and others, because before this happened, before social media, we had only a picture of disability that was it was kind of made by able-bodied people. It was what was presented to us through books or through media, through television, and that became a distortion and a stigma in itself that I needed to work through as someone with a chronic illness or disability, where I thought, I'm falling 3 times a day, and sometimes I can't get out of bed or crawl to the bathroom, but I don't think I'm allowed to use a wheelchair because I can walk. And realizing from online, from being educated from people who were actually disabled, that most wheelchair users are ambulatory. And, that's something that we never think about or is never shown to us, where if I'm using a wheelchair and I stand up to get something on the top shelf in a grocery store, people all of a sudden say, oh, you're faking. But that's the reality for a lot of people who use mobility aids or who are experiencing severe symptoms, where there's a fluctuation, and realizing that you're not alone in that either. That having fluctuating symptoms and good days and bad days doesn't mean, oh, you're faking it on your bad days or you're faking it on your good days. It's actually the reality of disability and chronic illness, where most of us experience fluctuating symptoms that can be vastly fluctuating. So having that as a platform that exposes what's invisible, with people being vulnerable about things that we've never been able to be vulnerable about before, and then actually educating from the inside of what disability is actually like, what chronic fatigue, chronic pain, chronic illness is actually like, and the different ways that people are coping with that. It helps you feel less alone, it helps you feel more informed, and it also helps people who may not be experiencing any symptoms. You could be totally able-bodied. It helps them also understand more about what someone with a chronic illness might be experiencing, how to support them, and how to navigate the things that might be surprising, like mobility aid use or fluctuating symptoms that most people don't know about.
Yes, thank you for bringing that point up, Sydney. I know part-time wheelchair users often will push themselves beyond their limitations because they don't want to be seen as an imposter. And, just having the ability to use these aids, like you said, a cane or a wheelchair, a rollator, these things, we shouldn't shame each other for having to use if it allows us to be able to live more. And I know in several years of my journey, it took so long to get a wheelchair approved, but I finally got it approved at the time when I was beginning to heal. So in my situation, the wheelchair use was limited to only long-term outdoor events, but it was an aid that allowed me to do things, to be more present with my family when they wanted to go to things like a theme park, for instance. Sure, I can't ride the rides, but I was there and I could watch the joy in their faces because I had this aid. So I do appreciate you bringing that up. Like, we need to be able to use the tools that are there, the technology that is available to help us get better, feel better, and just be present. So with that, I do want to ask, what led you to write Fearfully and Wonderfully Broken at this point in your journey?
So when I first got sick, before we had the diagnosis, before we understood what was going on, I was in so much pain at nights that I couldn't sleep a lot of the time. So I'd come out, into the living room at like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and I would write, kind of as a way to just process what was happening to me, because I had no other way to do that. I had no information on what was going on. So I said at the time, like, no one is ever going to see this. Like, not even my spouse is going to see these pages, because they were so vulnerable and they were so broken. And I felt like no one else feels this way. And if I was to tell anyone else that I was thinking these things and wrestling with these things, they would never look at me the same way again. So 4 months after my diagnosis, or 4 months after we got married, my husband was deployed overseas. So that first year of disability was living on my own. It was kind of trying to figure out how to live in this body and still do life by myself. And there were a lot of hard days with that too. So I just continued writing. And as I halfway through that year of my husband's deployment is when I started sharing a little bit more of my story online. And again, that was just kind of a way to process, but more and more people were resonating with it. And I realized that I wasn't actually alone in feeling these things. And it gave me courage to kind of be more vulnerable and realize that when I was vulnerable, that was encouraging other people in the same way that I was encouraged by their vulnerability. And so that's kind of where the writing happened, just kind of as a process for myself to understand and wrestle with these things. And as the years continued, now I'm on, I think, year 5 of being disabled. Looking back through those writings, I've realized that one, that vulnerability is something that's shared with a lot of people, and we don't talk about it often enough. And then two, I can actually see ways that God has used my suffering all the way from those early threads of pain and disability. And I can see ways that he's brought redemption through that, even now, even in this lifetime. And that's been a vast encouragement to me. So this book kind of came from those early pages, pulling from what it's like to be in the midst of suffering. And I'm still, obviously experiencing symptoms. I'm still using a wheelchair. So I'm writing from the perspective of someone who has not healed, who's not gotten better. And I think we need more books written by the people who are still in the suffering. And how do we cope with understanding that we might not get better in this lifetime? How do we deal with the disbelief of other people or the dismissal of doctors? How do we struggle with symptoms that don't have a diagnosis or don't have a label? And these things that we're wrestling with that we think we're not supposed to be wrestling with. What is it like to grieve as a Christian and be very, very sad about the season you're in while still having hope in Jesus? So those kinds of questions, that's what I want to give language to in my book. I kind of want to just sit by someone else in the dark, someone else who's suffering, and say, I'm here too. Like we're both experiencing this, and this is really, really hard. So let's go to Jesus. There's nowhere else to go. So it pulls a lot from my story, but it also is written just as an encouragement and as a practical help to to another believer who's going through a period of suffering, and that could be physical or mental, circumstantial, anything. But obviously, my perspective is from someone who's chronically ill and disabled, and what it looks like to walk through that.
Yes, and I love the resource that now is available through your book to everyone. In the beginning, when I started healing, I really focused on detoxing the body and the home and making sure personal care products were clean. I was eating clean, drinking filtered water, doing all the right things. And as I got to a certain level, I kind of plateaued. And it was that neuroplasticity piece that was missing, that ability to shift mindset and to still have hope despite lingering symptoms. And so what I've done with my programs and what I've written on in my book as well, it's called Meshed Up, A Guide to Healing from Implant Illness, is refocused in the beginning of a healing journey on neuroplasticity. And so I have a library of resources that I put together and kind of curated based on where a client is at. But I'd love to include your book as a piece to read in the beginning so they can start making changes in neuroplasticity before going full on into any kind of detox protocol. So I appreciate that. And I know we're going to include links in our show notes for anyone who'd like to pick that up. But before we go there, for someone navigating chronic symptoms, whether it be from FND or from Asia syndrome or unknown causes, what's one place they can begin to rebuild hope?
I mean, it definitely has to start with the Lord. And again, that raw honesty in prayer, but also finding community is, I think, centrally important. And especially with people who have chronic illnesses, it can be really hard to find that community because we do not have the social energy to be able to go out there and make new friends every day. So one of the things that I recommend to people, is, if you're a believer, you're in a church, to talk to the elders, the pastors, the leadership of your church about what you might be experiencing and ask them to connect you. So not only might they have the resources and the understanding to be able to encourage you personally and walk with you through whatever you're going through, but you have to remember that other people in the congregation are also going to them with their struggles. They might know people that are experiencing similar things or who have walked through similar things that you might not know about, because so much of these symptoms and the struggle is invisible, unless you're actually sharing it. So if you go to them and you ask them for support, they might be able to also connect you with someone else who can walk through it. And then you kind of are able to jump over the social obligations and the small talk and trying to find the right person. And you're just connected with them directly. That's one of the beautiful avenues and the blessings that the Lord gives us in a church. And realizing that when that has been given to you, allow yourself to be vulnerable. Allow yourself to express the things to this person that is safe, that you have not been able to share with someone else, and allow them to support you, to help you, to listen to you, and to walk beside you in this. And coming from the perspective of someone who's been both the approacher and the approached, there is a deep blessing to the person as well who you come to and you're vulnerable with, in their ability to be able to walk with you through something. And I remember I experienced a miscarriage a little while ago, and I was talking to a mom and I was being vulnerable with her about what I was experiencing. And she had had many miscarriages in her life. And she said, one day, like, I've never met you. I'm walking through this with you right now, even though we're strangers. And one day you're going to be sitting with someone else on the phone who's going to feel completely upended from something like this that happens to them. And you're going to be able to walk through it with them. And that is something that's actually going to be a little thread of meaning that's added on to what you're going through right now, because now you're able to walk beside someone else. And coming from the perspective of someone who's needed to be vulnerable, needed to seek out those connections, and then having people come to me and saying, I'm going through chronic illness, I'm going through these symptoms, I'm scared to become a mom, and now I get to help them through those places. That's a blessing to me. So know that in approaching that person, you're also blessing them. They're experiencing the blessing of being able to walk in community with you through something that they've experienced. And there's a mutual dependency, a mutual blessing and gift that God brings out through community like that.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and definitely I resonate with everything you've shared with us. Before we wrap, a heartfelt thank you to you, Sydney, for sharing your story, your faith, your perspective with such honesty and depth. And it's a conversation that I know is going to stay with me, and I probably will stay with many of our audience members. So I would like for them to know how they can learn more about you or be able to purchase your book.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and YouTube. So the.annegirl is my handle. So you can find me on there. I also have a website, sydneyannebennett.com, and my book is Fearfully and Wonderfully Broken. So you can find that on Amazon or through my website or social media. You can purchase it any major online bookstore. So if you reach out and message me through my platforms, I try to personally connect with everyone who messages me. So I'd love to meet you there.
Awesome. We will have all of that information in the show notes. And to all of you listening, if today's episode resonated, we invite you to continue the journey with us by liking and subscribing to our podcast. You can also gain valuable insights to healing from chronic illness through both of our books. Again, we'll have Sydney Bennett's book on our show notes so that you can have access to that quickly. And for those dealing with implant illness or having loved ones who have gone through the gambit with conventional medicine and just have not gone better, you can reach out to me and get your copy of Meshed Up, A Guide to Healing from Implant Illness. It's a resource really designed to help you better understand your body and decode your symptoms and take empowered steps toward healing, no matter where you're starting from. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much.